welcome to be here. Hello, YouTube. Nice to see you all out there. Not that I can see you, but you can see me, so hi. And yeah, we're going to talk about open source, and we're going to talk about free software, and we're going to talk about a thing that I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is this cycle that nerds go through, where first of all, you discover that something new and shiny exists in the world, and now you're sad because you don't have it. And 5 minutes ago you were fine, and they're like, oh, there's an iPhone 26. I don't have an iPhone 26. I need it. I will be miserable. Or maybe it's a new framework, or a component, or a piece of software, or a piece of networking equipment, or kind of whatever your nerd jam is. It's a new thing that does that, and you're like, I need to get one of those. And so you go on and you order it, you download it, and the next day it turns up, and you're like, there it is. And then there's that moment where you're setting up your new, wonderful, shiny, the device that, this is the one that's going to make you happy. Like, no more devices after this. It'll do everything. And you're like, hang on a second. I didn't remember reading about that. My most recent example of this bit here, this is a Fitbit Versa 3, which is like, it's a watch that'll play audio without you having to take your phone. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. And I get it, and I gotta try to upload audio files. I'm like, there's no upload thing here. There's a button mark linked to Deezer. I'm like, what the hell is Deezer? And Deezer is a subscription music service, one of the ones I don't have. Like, I've got the others, and I'm like, oh. And that's the point where you're like, well, this piece of technology I've got here, I know that technically it can do what I need. Because I know that all the hardware and all the components and everything is in there. I just need to tweak it. I need to figure out, can I upgrade it or hack it or modify it or something. And all you folks out there who edit code in something that looks like this, where you've got your color scheme, you've got your font, and you've tweaked the line spacing in VS Code because if it's too narrow, you don't like it. You know what I'm talking about. Like, you're tweaking every detail. And I think this to me is always the hallmark of a true hacker in the kind of classical sense of the word. Is it somebody who is like, I am not going to accept the defaults. I'm going to modify this thing until it does what I want, the way that I want it to be done. And to that kind of hacker, the worst thing you can possibly do is you can say no. Not for any good technical reason. You can say no. You are not allowed to do that because it's against the terms and conditions. Because you need an Enterprise Pro license to do it. Oh, that's part of our Premium Plus package. Have you thought about upgrading? And you're like, it's all here. I have all the things I need. I just need to make them do what I want. In 1980, MIT donated Xerox PARC donated a laser printer to the Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at MIT. Now, MIT had an AI lab in 1980. They've had one since the 1950s, and they have been about 5 years away from general artificial intelligence since 1954. And they're still about 5 years away from general artificial intelligence. But Xerox was this astonishing company. Xerox invented a whole bunch of innovations. They invented mice, they invented Windows, they invented Ethernet, they invented laser printing, and they basically killed it all because they were terrified that computers was going to jeopardize their photocopying business. And MIT, they invented blockchain, they invented spreadsheets, they invented passwords, they invented networking, they wrote the software that took human beings to the moon, they invented the Roomba, and they might have invented free software. Because one of the problems that the laser printer at MIT had was the paper in it jammed. You folks remember what a photocopier is, right? Like, you know, you have to check. There's people out there now who've never seen a photocopier because they've worked from home their entire adult life. And that kind of freaks me out. But yeah, so photocopiers would jam. And you'd be making your copies, and then you're like, oh, okay. And you kind of pull the door open, and it always reminds me of like trying to get the dog to let go of the frisbee. So you get the paper out, and then you slam the door, and you push that, and it starts making copies again. And the Xerox printer was basically a photocopier with a network card attached to it. And it had a problem because it jammed, just like any other photocopier. But when your photocopier jams, you're stood in front of it, and it happens right there and then. With a network printer, you send some printouts, and you forget about it. And then half an hour later, you're like, oh, I'll go grab a cup of coffee. I wonder if my printouts come through. And you go to the printer, and of course it's jammed. And it's not jammed on your job. It's jammed on the job 3 jobs before your job. So you unjam it, and you get it going, and then it starts, and then it jams again. And one of the people who was working at MIT was this guy. It's Richard Stallman, the founder of the Free Software Foundation. If you know anything at all about Richard Stallman, you will probably have opinions. You can share them later over beer. It's not during the talk. But I don't think you can talk about free software without acknowledging the role that Stallman played in how we got to where we are today. Because he was like, well, it's a printer with a network card. We know the printer can tell when it's jammed because it's got a little red light that comes on. So why don't we just modify it so that if the red light comes on, it sends a message across the network, and all the people who are logged in get a thing saying, hey, the printer's jammed, and someone can go and unblock it. It's easy. So he goes to Xerox and he says, hey, can I have the software for the printer that you gave us? And Xerox says no. Xerox says, the person he spoke to at Xerox said, I have been specifically told not to give Richard Stallman a copy of the software for the laser printer. Now, there is a version of the historical narrative which says that this incident opened his eyes to the exploitation of the common worker by, tech corporations and galvanized his commitment to free speech and open software. There's another version that says it pissed him off so much he is still seething about it 40 years later. I think both versions are true. But he's spoken a bunch of times about how it was this one incident with the Xerox laser printer that made him kind of, dedicate the rest of his career to creating free software. Now, let's talk about that word free for a second, because free is one of those words in English that can mean a whole bunch of things. We have free speech, we have free beer, we have free puppy, we have free Mandela, we have free all of these different things. What are we actually talking about? Let's talk about free as in free beer, which, excellent. Everyone likes free beer, right? Now, let's say that I give you a beer. What can you do with it? You can drink it, unless you're driving and you've already had one. So what if you're, you don't want to drink it? What else can you? Can you sell it? No, you need a license to do that. Can you keep it? You ever got up after a house party and there's a pint that's left on the side that's been there since yesterday? Yeah, you can't. Giving you free beer you didn't pay any money for, it gives you beer that didn't cost money, but you don't get any freedom with that. All you can do with it is you can drink it or you can pour it down the sink. You can't keep it, you can't sell it, maybe you can't drink it because you're only 14 years old, or because you're on medication, or because you're driving, or any number of reasons. So free beer is, this doesn't cost you anything, but we are absolutely going to dictate what you can and cannot do with it. And there's a bunch of software out there in the world right now which works on exactly this principle. Have you ever had a nice refreshing pint of Instagram? You didn't pay any money for it, but if you want to see stuff on Instagram, you've got to be on Instagram. You've got to log into Instagram. You've got to do the Instagram thing. You can't just go, I want Instagram content, but I want to access it from my Microsoft Bing account, because that's just not a thing that happens here. Now, software is expensive stuff, right? Like, between us in this room, we probably spend millions of pounds every year on computer software for doing various things. It's a significant investment. We spend a lot of money on it. Let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if any of you own second-hand software. Anyone ever had a second-hand car? Yeah? Second-hand washing machine, second-hand guitar, second-hand trombone, like expensive things. We buy them, we use them until we don't need them anymore, and then normally we sell them. We pass them on to somebody else who gives us money for them. The only people in the world who have second-hand software are the people hunting down like original Microsoft Windows 95 in the box as a collector's item, because somehow the software industry has managed to get us all completely okay with the idea that you pay for it, you use it, and then if you want to use it again, you pay for it again. And when you've finished it, it has no plus or no resale value. Now, this is true of cloud, it's true of desktop, it's true of almost all commercial software that exists these days, with one very notable exception, which might be a bit of a nostalgia moment for some of the folks in the room. When I was a kid at school, games for consoles came on cartridges. And the point about the cartridges, you couldn't copy them, because there was no consumer hardware available that could read and write these things. So effectively, a copy of Sonic Hedgehog or Super Mario or whatever was a piece of plastic with a computer game in it, but the plastic was the game, was the license, was the intellectual property. It was one thing that maintained its value. And so you could buy second-hand games. You could rent them from Blockbuster and play them all weekend and then try and finish it on Sunday because your mum was going to take it back on Monday when you were at school. Now, when I was a kid at school, there were two kinds of kids at my school. I went to school in Bristol in the west of England, and there were the console kids and the computer kids. And the console kids had skateboards, shaved heads, listened to rap music, and were always in trouble for setting stuff on fire. And the computer kids had long hair and mountain bikes, computers, we listened to rock music, and we also set stuff on fire, but we didn't get caught. And when we wanted to play computer games, we had a choice, because we could go to a store and we could buy them. We could pay money for X-Wing, or Eye of the Beholder, or The Secret of Monkey Island. Now, when I was a teenager, these retailed for between 20 and 30 pounds in the 90s. That's a lot of money. That's a month's worth of Big Macs, or a new pair of jeans. Like, if I wanted to buy a computer game that month, that was my allowance. That was the only thing I could buy for a month. Had to be a pretty good game to justify that kind of investment, and many of them were not. Now, we could copy them. You could go to Steve, your mate Steve, and go, Steve, you got Monkey Island? Yeah, and you'd copy the disc. And of course, the games manufacturers and publishers, well, you can't copy games. We've got copy protection devices. There is no copy protection device that will defeat bored teenagers with no money and nothing better to do. They gave us cardboard decoder rings that you have to use to get past the next level of the game. We would take them apart with tweezers and copy them with tracing paper and put them back together. They would give you secret decoder rings. We'd reverse engineer those. They gave you enter word 16 on page 48 of the manual. We sneaked into Dad's office and photocopied the entire manual, all 100 pages of it. We worked out how to copy. There were sectors on IBM PC disks that MS-DOS, the operating system, couldn't read, but the game firmware could. So we figured out ways and got hold of tools that we could use to copy that. Because, whatever. Now, we knew this was kind of technically illegal. And if you had made like 100 copies of Monkey Island and gone and sold them at a car boot sale and got arrested, probably not a surprise. But the Avon and Somerset police had better things to do than go and arrest someone who had copied Monkey Island off their friend Steve. But there was a third way we could get hold of computer software. Because in the back of the computer magazines, there were advertisements of companies that sold free software. And this made perfect sense, because they all said, you're paying us for the disk. The code it's free. Now, some of this was what's called public domain. It's people who had created a bit of software, put it out in the world, and they're like, I don't even care if you pretend you wrote this. It's public. I waive all copyright. I don't even want you to admit that I wrote it. It's just out there. Some of it was like promotional ware. Some of it was cut down demos. Like you could get a version of a word processor that didn't have a save function, so you could write essays. But then you're like, oh, I guess I'd better send them a check, and then they would send you a code you could use to unlock it. One that absolutely stands out as just sort of wonderful naive optimism. The Ford Motor Company in the United States, they made a thing called the Ford Simulator, which was a driving game where you could go, and this was in 4-color CGA on the IBM PC. You could go into a menu and you could choose which of the Ford cars from 1988 you wanted to drive. And then you could drive it along a desert track in 4-color CGA with the PC speaker going bloop, 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 bloop. And the idea was that you'd be so impressed by this, you'd go and buy a car afterwards. Because Ford bankrolled the whole thing and just gave it away for free. And, it was kind of a fun driving game. Terrible, terrible piece of marketing. But the most interesting games out there, the most interesting software out there, was a model called shareware. And shareware was based on the idea that they would give you a piece of software on the disk, which was, it was fun or it was useful up to a point. And if you wanted to go further than that, then you could send off a check and they would send you the rest of it. Now, one of the pioneers of that was this guy called Scott Miller. He founded a company called Apogee Software. And he wrote games for the IBM PC. He wrote a game called Kingdom of Croz, which was so big, it wouldn't fit on one floppy disk. And so he had a brainwave. Like, what if I split the game into 3 chapters? Chapter 1 I'll give away for free, put it on bulletin boards, copy it in the schoolyard, do whatever you want, sell it in your magazines, and if you like it, you get to the end and a screen pops up saying, hey, you're not finished. If you enjoyed that, send a check for, I think it was $20, and then his parents' address in Texas, and I will send you chapters 2 and 3. He made $100,000 off Kingdom of Croz in about 3 months, and was like, okay, this is amazing, I'm going to be a games publisher now, I've found the answer to this. A couple of months after this, he gets wind of this. It's a game written by, it's called Dangerous Dave, and it was one of the first IBM PC platform games that had the kind of Super Mario style jumping and collecting things, and it was written by these gentlemen, John Carmack, John Romero, a guy called Tom Hall. They worked at a company out of Louisiana called SoftDisk. And they were, John Carmack certainly, I think, is one of the best graphics programmers in history, ever. Like, absolutely unsurpassed. Everyone said, IBM PC can't do side-scrolling. It's impossible. And we believed them, because why would you say that unless you knew what you were talking about? Nobody told Carmack. He went to the beach house one weekend, and they ported Super Mario to the IBM PC. Because he figured out how to do smooth sideways scrolling by basically drawing an extra column of pixels off the screen in a bit of memory you weren't supposed to be able to talk to, and then sliding it in sideways. They sent a copy of this to Nintendo, and went, are you interested in licensing Super Mario for the PC? And got a letter back from Nintendo of America saying, boys, this is very impressive work, bury it so deep, if this ever gets out, we are going to sue you so hard they won't be able to find the bodies. Because Nintendo did not want anybody copying Super Mario in a schoolyard, because they want people going and buying the consoles, because the cartridges, because that's where all the money is. So Scott Miller gets in touch with them and says, look, this is really impressive technology. Why don't we just completely change the entire game? So instead of Italian plumber, it's a kid, and instead of jumping, he can have a pogo stick, and instead of saving the princess, he's got to rescue his babysitter. And they came up with this. This was Commander Keen, Invasion of the Vorticons. And it was one of the first really kind of smooth scrolling, engaging, bouncing, interactive platform games. I played this all the way through, absolutely loved it, and it was published using Apogee's model. Part 1 is free, and if you get to the end, you can send off a check to get part 2 and 3. This made enough money in 2 months that all the folks from SoftDisk, they quit their jobs, they founded a company called Ideas from the Deep that then became ID, that then became id, and id Software went on to produce some of the most revolutionary games in the history of PC gaming. Wolfenstein 3D was the first kind of 3D game where instead of just turning right angles, you could actually strafe around corners and stuff. Doom invented multiplayer network deathmatch. Doom crashed every college network in America. The system administrators had no idea what this traffic was or where it was coming from. And Quake, now I did a version of this talk where I said Quake was the first full 3D first-person shooter, and some people in the audience got very upset because apparently that was Descent 2. But Quake was one of the first full 3D first-person shooters. It's one of the first games to have multiplayer networked over the internet. It was one of the first games to have 3D graphics acceleration and that kind of thing. But these games, they also represented a paradigm shift in the way software got distributed. I got Wolfenstein on the cover of PC Format magazine in 1992. I copied Doom off a friend of mine at school, and I downloaded Quake from the id Software website. Now, this, if you look closely, this is that weird point in history where you probably have the internet at college or at work, but you don't have it at home. So you could download Quake as 7 files that would fit on a floppy disk each. So you could take your stack of disks home and then put them back together when you got home. Now, this is about kind of 1997 we're talking here. This is the point where everybody gets online. Now, I'm kind of lucky. I'm the age, I was born in 1978, so my childhood was completely offline, analog, disconnected. I got my first email address when I was 16, but I got my email address at the same time as everyone else in that office got an email address, because that was just kind of the point in history when people got email. So I'm kind of right on the cusp there of having this analog childhood and digital kind of adulthood. My whole career has been connected. And around 1997, there's a bunch of people getting online. They're getting email at home. They're getting on the web. They're starting to figure out, can we book holidays on the internet? Can we send photographs over the internet? Just wait for the authorities to go and bother somebody else. And when we got there, we discovered that there's a bunch of people who'd been online a lot longer than we had, who had ideas about free software that had nothing to do with can you get it on the cover of a magazine. To them, free software was about the 4 essential freedoms. The freedom to study how the program works and modify it to do what you want. The freedom to distribute copies. The freedom to share your own modifications. And later, somebody pointed out that this doesn't actually give you the right to run the program in the first place. So they came and they put in freedom 0 at the beginning, which is the freedom to run the program however you want for any purpose. These 4 essential freedoms were the founding philosophy of the Free Software Foundation. It's founded by Richard Stallman in about 1982 with the goal of creating a completely free, as in free speech, computer operating system. They almost got there. By the end of the 1990s, the GNU project, stands for GNU's Not Unix, because Unix influenced the design of a lot of their code. They had a compiler, they had a linker, they had a text editor, they had awk and sed and grep, and almost everything you need to run a full Unix-compatible operating system, except they didn't have an operating system kernel, which is a bit like saying, I've almost invented a car. I got wing mirrors, I got windscreen wiper, I got tires, and I've got, heated leather seats and a stereo. Bit of trouble with the engine, and they've been working on this for quite a while by this point. Along the way, though, they had produced something that I think is probably more historically significant than any piece of code. They had produced the GNU General Public License. They'd sat down with a bunch of very smart lawyers who were not getting paid. They were doing all this pro bono for the Free Software Foundation. And they had tried to ratify those 4 essential freedoms in a document that would stand up in a court of law. Now, 1991, Linus Torvalds, 21-year-old student at the University of Helsinki in Finland, he invents an operating system kernel. And he puts this lovely post on Usenet. Hello, everybody out there using Minix. I'm doing a free operating system. Just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU, for 386 AT clones. It's been brewing since April, starting to get ready. I'd like some feedback. You read the whole thing, there's a lovely note further down the thread about it'll only ever support this kind of hard drive because that's the only one I can afford. But suddenly they had a kernel. Suddenly the combination of the Linux kernel and the GNU tools meant that there was a completely free operating system. December 1991, Linus agrees to publish the Linux kernel under the GNU General Public License. And so by the start of 1992, for the first time in history, there is a production-grade operating system out there that doesn't cost any money, that enshrines the 4 essential freedoms that anybody can download, modify, copy, run it for any purpose. Now, it's probably a good time to stop and ask, why were these people doing this in the first place? And also, where's open source? Because at this point in history, no one has ever called it open source. That term did not exist. Now, I think John Carmack and Romero, Tom Hall, they wrote free software because they knew that it would sell, and that was the best way to get money, and if they had money, they could buy pizza and play computer games. And I'm pretty sure that is what has driven them from day one. John Romero got so rich off the back of Quake that he bought a Ferrari, and then he lost it in a deathmatch competition, and the next day he went back to work in Texas writing computer games for a living. Like, that's someone who loves to code. I think in the case of Linus Torvalds, he was doing what I think many of us have probably done. It's just like, look at the thing that I made. Look, admire my work and validate me because I think it's really cool and I'd love it if you all thought it was really cool as well. And it might have got a little bit out of hand in the intervening decades. But in the case of the Free Software Foundation and the GNU project, I think for them, this was genuinely kind of a bunch of people going, look, these ideas don't mean anything unless you can actually download and run them. We can bang on about free software, but unless it exists, it's just empty noise. Now, the timing of this was kind of interesting. Around the time that, sort of Quake and things come out, 96, 97, the world is getting very excited about the World Wide Web. And there's a lot of companies out there being like, we need a website. And I don't know if any of you, I was kind of there at this point in history. Companies go, we need a website. Corporate IT is too busy to waste time on stupid projects, but we need a website, but they're too busy, so you can do it, and we're not giving you any budget, and we're not giving you any support, and you have no idea what you're doing. It was awesome. It was literally like the World Wide Web in the early days was just this free-for-all of let's see what we can make this thing do, which meant a lot of people like me were like, well, I wonder if I can get a website. You'd get onto the cupboard where they kept the dead computers that nobody wanted anymore and see if you could turn one of them into a web server. And there was a personal web server for Windows 95. One of the worst things. No. This was not good. You could not put this on the internet. It would get hacked. This is where the internet learned how to hack things. So we were scratching around looking for better solutions. And of course, the GNU project and Linux, they have a web server. They've got databases. They've got preprocessors. They've got early versions of things like PHP and MySQL and all these kinds of things. And companies see an opportunity because companies like Red Hat, they're thinking, well, hang on. There are potential customers out there who want the free software, but they want the convenience they get if they paid for it. They want a nice box with everything in the box and it all works together, and if it doesn't work, There's a number on the back that you can phone and you can get technical support. Why don't we do that? We'll put all the free software in a nice box, put a phone number on the back, free software, only $79.99. Now, this is the beginning of the problem, because if you went to your boss and you said, I need $80 to buy free software, I'm like, well, it's free. Why do you want money for it? No, it's not that kind of free. And this was starting to become a problem, because the companies that were, Corel, Red Hat, Slackware, those companies were like, how can we sell it and still promote the idea of people being free to work with it, free to modify it? Netscape announced they were going to publish all the source code to Netscape Navigator around the end of '97, and that kind of galvanized the community into what are we going to call this thing? Now the term actually comes back to this lady. This is Christine Peterson. She coined the term open source. She worked at a think tank called the Foresight Institute, and she was in a bunch of meetings with people, and as she put it, those new to the term free software assume it is referring to the price. Old-timers must then launch into an explanation, usually given as follows: we mean free as in freedom, not free as in beer. At this point, a discussion on software has turned into one about the price of an alcoholic beverage. Between meetings that week, I was still focused on the need for a better name, and I came up with the term open source software. Now, there's a lovely little piece of psychological engineering involved here. She was one of the few women in a thing dominated by men, so instead of saying, I've got a great idea, she just started using the word and seeing if other people picked up on it. And they did. And it got established by stealth. And a week later, Eric Raymond and Bruce Perens, they register opensource.org, software gets honest, and they start promoting this idea of open source is software that gives you freedom, but it can still cost money. You may have to pay for it, but once you've paid for it, what you get is convenience, and you get a convenient package with all the applications and source code, and you then have the freedom to go and modify them and use them for whatever you need. And what's fascinating about that, the mechanism that they use to enforce it. The GNU General Public License includes this clause here: you may not impose any further restrictions on the recipient's exercise of the rights granted herein. So I can't sell you free software and make it not free in the course of doing that. You have to have the rights that I used to sell it to you in the first place. You have to be able to pay those rights forward. And the mechanism that they use to enforce this is copyright. Because copyright basically says if you've created something, you control who can use it and how they can use it and what they can use it for. Now, there was a really interesting kind of benchmark lawsuit for this. This was the Linksys WRT54G wireless router. Early 2000s, this cost about, in the US it was $129. In the UK it was, I think, about 120, 140 pounds. And this thing was basically a tiny computer with 4 network ports and a Wi-Fi chip. They sold hundreds of thousands of these things. It was massively successful. And 2003, this guy called Andrew Miklas is poking around on their website, and he downloads a firmware update for this thing. I don't know why, just because that's what he was doing. And he unzips it, and he goes poking through the contents of the firmware. He's like, this is interesting. There's a Linux kernel in here, and there's a bunch of GNU networking tools in here. This is free software. Let's go and get the source code. So he goes to their website and says, where's the source code for all this? And they don't have any. Now, the reason this is interesting to him and to the wider community is if any of you folks tried to get Wi-Fi working on Linux in the early 2000s, it was horrible. Like, the manufacturers did not give a crap about Wi-Fi support for Linux. You couldn't get drivers, you couldn't get firmware, you were lucky if you could get the thing to connect at all. This thing had Broadcom Wi-Fi chips in it, which were very, very widespread, very standard, and it was running Linux, which meant somebody had written Linux drivers for the Wi-Fi chips, and they wanted the source code so they could pull them apart and see how they worked. So this kind of rattles backwards and forwards. Now, while this is going on, Cisco, big company, lots of money, Cisco buy Linksys. And at one point, somebody must have gone to somebody at Cisco and went, boss, we might have accidentally bought a lawsuit. Because it turns out that Linksys was in violation of this. Andrew Miklas goes to the Free Software Foundation and says, hey, they've got Wi-Fi driver chips for Linux, and they're not publishing the source code, and they have to because they're distributing Linux, GNU Linux software. Now, there's a bit of a gap in the timeline here. In 2003, Linksys released the source code for the router, including all the drivers and everything, and you're like, okay, great, well done, Free Software Foundation, you got the thing done, we got the code. 5 years later, the Free Software Foundation sued Cisco. Now, I don't know what happened in the intervening 5 years. I couldn't find any kind of reliable reports of it. I think what probably happened is, so for this point, the Free Software Foundation are like, we've scored a point. Let's keep pushing. Because what they want more than anything, is to get in front of something like a district court in the United States of America and have a federal judge say, yes, the GNU General Public License is legally binding and anybody who violates it can be sued. Because that is the kind of precedent they have been pushing for the whole time. What actually happened is that Cisco settled. They turn around, and this is the point Cisco's lawyers are saying, look, don't take this to court because you might lose and it'll hurt the whole time that you're losing. Just, do the nice thing, give them a bunch of money, appoint a compliance director, make the lawsuit go away. And so Cisco now publish, when you have their devices that use GNU or Linux-derived software, they publish source code for that. It didn't get as far as the lawsuit, which is what the Free Software Foundation was trying to do. The only time that's happened that I can find was in Germany. There's a guy called Harold Welter who I believe made a bunch of money off doing open source networking consultancy, and now he basically finds companies that are violating the GPL and he sues them for a hobby. And he discovered that D-Link was selling a network attached storage, like a network hard drive in Germany that ran Linux that did not have the source code available. He sued them, and a Frankfurt district court said, yes, you're in violation, the GPL is legally binding under German law, but they said in this particular instance, so they didn't get them the kind of blanket, yes, the GPL is law, now everyone go and deal with it. Now, all this stuff is going on around the sort of dawn of the millennium. Open source is very new, very shiny, and a lot of people are getting very excited about this idea of community collaborative software potentially jeopardizing Microsoft's position as the dominant giant in business desktop computing, to the extent that Steve Ballmer in 2002 goes on the radio on his way to a trade show, he's doing an interview, and he says this. He says, Linux is a cancer that attaches itself in an intellectual property sense to everything it touches. That's the way the license works. Now, every single word he says here is wrong. That's not how the license works, that's not how Linux works, that's not how intellectual property works, it's also not how cancer works. But it was a great soundbite, and it did the rounds, and of course this basically divides the world into the people who hate Microsoft because their CEO thinks Linux is cancer, and the people who think the Linux people are weird because they use Windows because it'll run their games. Microsoft has done one of the most dramatic about-faces in the intervening 2 decades, and the reason for that is entirely down to the cloud. Because the cloud gave us a completely new way of turning code into money, because it means we can give the code away for free, and we can charge you money every time you run it. Now, when I was webmaster, way back in the early 2000s, one of the things I did is I built web servers for people. And someone was like, we need a web server. I'm like, all right, well, we'll charge you, I think we used to charge them like £1,000 to set the thing up and configure it and put Linux on it and all this sort of stuff, and then a couple of $100 a month for hosting and maintenance. And once we'd signed the contract, we'd order the machine from Dell, and it would arrive maybe 6 weeks later. You'd get someone to help you carry it upstairs because they were heavy. You'd make a network cable and you'd patch it in, and you'd put Linux on it, Red Hat or Ubuntu and Apache and all this kind of stuff. Now, if I'd had 50 people ring me up in the morning and go, we all need web servers, in theory, hey, £50,000 payday. In practice, not a chance in hell, because there is no way I could build 50 web servers in a day, and that's where cloud comes in, because with cloud, yeah, we can give you 50 web servers in a day. Easy, not a problem. How many? You want 500 web servers? Please give us your MasterCard. There you go, you got 500 web servers. And so for companies like Microsoft, who are selling the compute capacity, they kind of don't care who owns the code or where it came from. What they want is you to run your stuff on their cloud. And it turns out that quite a lot of the software that is running in their cloud is free software. Let's talk about Sammy. Sammy the squirrel. Sammy lives in the woodland, and Sammy frolics and climbs trees and gathers acorns and splashes around in the stream with all of the other animals that live in the wood. And every Sunday, all the woodland animals go down to the glade with the old fallen tree stump, and they do woodland show and tell, and they all show off their projects they've been working on. And Sammy likes to write computer games, and Sammy has written a game called Acorn Adventure. which is a fun game where you play a little squirrel who runs around the forest and gathers acorns and jumps across the stream. And everyone's like, Acorn Adventure, that's so exciting. And it's free. You can all have a copy of Acorn Adventure and you can take it home and you can play it and you can share it with your friends. That's absolutely fine. Now, the next week, when they gather for Woodland Show and Tell, Jeff the Raccoon shows up with an arcade machine. It's a cabinet, it's painted, it's yellow and purple, it's got proper buttons and a joystick and everything, and it's running Acorn Adventure. And Sammy thinks this is like the coolest thing ever. Like, that's my game. It's running on an actual arcade machine. And all the little animals are queuing up and they're playing and they're putting in their 20p's and they're bothering their parents for more money so they can have another go on the game. Next week, Jeff turns up in a solid gold pickup truck with 2 arcade machines. Now, by this point, some of the animals are getting a little bit disgruntled because, the game is quite hard and it's not perfect. There's a couple of bugs in the graphics, and there's an owl who's too difficult to defeat, and there's a couple of bits where the music clearly isn't quite finished, and so they're saying to Sammy, you need to fix the game, and Sammy is saying, no, it's free software. You can fix it yourself. But of course it's not free to them, because they're paying 20p every time they have a go. They're paying customers, and they are entitled to customer support. Next week, Jeff turns up in a solid gold helicopter. But it doesn't matter, because Sammy has been hard at work. And Sammy has brought out Acorn Adventure 2. Better graphics, better gameplay, better music. The owl is easier to defeat. The music is finished this time. It solves all of the problems. And in the license for Acorn Adventure 2, Sammy has put a little note that says you can share it with your friends, take it home, take it to school, modify it, give it away on the internet. But if you want to run this on your pay-to-play arcade cabinet machine, you have to give me 20%. Because I forgot to gather any acorns for the winter because I've been too busy writing computer games and it's getting kind of cold. Now, of course, the woodland animals don't like that. They say Sammy is a traitor. Sammy's done an open source rug pull. Sammy has betrayed them. How dare Sammy tell them the software would be free forever and totally supported and all the other things that Sammy never actually said, and now turn around and say that if you want to run it on an arcade machine, you have to give them 50%. One of them gets so angry they swear they'll never play it again. Another one takes the last version of it, forks it, and calls it Open Bees Nuts. Everyone is angry about it. Now, maybe that's not what happened. Maybe what happens is around the time all of the woodland animals are getting very angry with Sammy about the bugs in the game, Wilbur pops up. Wilbur the Weasel. And Wilbur's like, oh, hey, friend. Looks like you're having a little bit of trouble with your game there. I can help out. I do a little graphics programming. And so Wilbur contributes a couple of fixes and a new level, fixes some of the music, and soon Wilbur has commit access to the Acorn Adventure repository and can push code straight into production. And one of the features that everyone wants is they want to be able to pay with a credit card, so they don't have to keep going and getting 20p's from the bank. And so Wilbur adds credit card and PayPal, and then somebody notices that every time you swipe your card machine in Acorn Adventure, it's sending a copy to a server, and is that a Belarusian IP address? And there's another one in North Korea, and they turn around to Wilbur to ask what's going on. Wilbur's vanished. There's no sign. Actually, now you mention it, we don't remember seeing Wilbur around here before. And some of the animals that were getting very angry and shouting at Sammy, we're not sure where they came from either. They turned up real quick all of a sudden. We live in a world where companies are trading $1 trillion in revenue a year by selling free software. Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Alibaba, Oracle Cloud. They are taking software like Linux and Apache and MySQL, software which is free, as in speech, free as in beer, and they're charging people quite a lot of money for the privilege of running it. Now, the risk here, the danger, or rather the angle they're exploiting here, is that the GNU General Public License says if you distribute software, you have to distribute all of your modifications as source code. But if all you're doing is providing access over a network, that's not distribution. They saw this coming. The Affero GPL was created way back in 2002. Affero was a consultancy in San Francisco that was building web software, and they went to the FSF, Free Software Foundation. They're like, your license is not bulletproof enough for what we want. We want to publish our software, which was management software for building web portals and things, but we want to make sure that anyone else who even just uses it to run their business has to publish their modifications. So the Affero GPL takes the whole thing one step further. It says, even if all you're doing is running this code on your website, everyone who visits your website, you are distributing it, you have to make a copy of the source code available to them so they can download, modify, redistribute for essential freedoms. Now, this is interesting to me because of what's happening in our industry at the moment, which is there is a lot of interest in AI, Copilot and Grok and Gemini and Cursor, and people using generative tools to write code. Now, it probably stands to reason that sooner or later, somebody working at, I don't know, let's say Netflix. Somebody is an engineer at Netflix and they're using Copilot to solve a problem. And Copilot has been trained on all of the code that's on GitHub. And a lot of that code is under the Affero AGPL. So some of that code might end up in Netflix's code base. And it gets reviewed, and it gets checked, and it gets deployed. And Netflix is now running Affero GPL code in a production environment, which means every time you go on to watch the new series of Squid Game or whatever, technically they're distributing that code to you across the network, and they are legally required to give you the source code, their modifications, which is all the stuff they added, which technically means there is an argument that Netflix would have to publish the source code to their entire video streaming stack, or violate the AGPL. Now, I'm sure that this, not only is it going to happen, it's already happened. I'm sure it's happened thousands of times. Netflix has better lawyers than the Free Software Foundation. They have more money. TikTok, I'm sure, has done this already. Amazon, I'm sure, has done this already. This is one of the things why companies are concerned about the proprietary ownership and licensing of AI tools, not because they're necessarily worried about stealing copyrighted code, is they're worried they might accidentally uncopyright all of their own code if the wrong stuff gets deployed into it. But they've got enough lawyers to make the problem go away. The AGPL is relatively rare for production-grade software, stuff that most of us here have heard of. Most of that kind of software is released under one of what are called the permissive licenses. The Apache license, the Berkeley Systems Distribution license, the MIT license. Now, these, Apache and BSD are pretty wordy. The MIT license, this is the whole thing. It fits on one PowerPoint slide, and what it basically says is, we own this software, do what you want, can't remove this license, and you can't sue us if the software doesn't work. That's it. That's the whole thing. Now, what it doesn't do is guarantee the 4 essential freedoms, because there is nothing in here which says they can't change their mind about it later. That comes down to copyright and ownership. Now, if any of you folks have ever committed any code to any of the open source projects run by Meta, company behind Facebook, you will have had to sign the contributor license agreement, which is the legal document which says, I transfer ownership of this code to you. It's still free, but it's not mine, it's yours. If you've contributed code to .NET or any of Microsoft's projects, you'll have had to sign the .NET contributor license agreement. That code is now owned by the .NET Foundation. It's not legally yours anymore, which brings up the question, why would people do this? Why would somebody work hard on code that they own and then sign it over to somebody else so they no longer have any ownership of it, and they don't get paid and that code is now free? Now, a lot of people, they do that because that's their job. One of the ways in which Microsoft's commitment to open source has manifested is they pay a lot of people to give away free software. Most of the code in .NET is published under the MIT license. All the people who write it, the vast majority of them, have jobs at Microsoft. They do that for a job. Amazon has about 7 people working full-time on PostgreSQL, the open source database engine. They've got jobs at Amazon. They write free software for a living. If that's your job, yeah, it kind of doesn't matter. That's it. Problem solved. A lot of other people are like, well, I do it for fun, and I don't really care about getting paid or not because it's my side hustle, it's my hobby. Actually, something I've seen happening a couple of times recently, most recently with AutoMapper and Mediator, is that the person maintaining the open source project, they used to have an employer who used it. So Jimmy Bogart, who wrote AutoMapper, one of the big .NET open source projects, he was working at a company that used AutoMapper on everything, so he could spend half a day a week just making it better because they were using that on their projects. He went independent. He doesn't have that job anymore, which means suddenly there's no one saying, well, we'll pay you to work on AutoMapper this afternoon. So that project stagnated, and as we're going to talk about later, what he's done is change the licensing on it. A lot of the time, it turns out that an open source project survived because the one person who kept it alive had a lenient employer who was happy for them to goof off on Wednesdays and work on their side thing. If that person loses their job, that's it. No more open source project. But there's a lot of people out there who are like Sammy Squirrel. They're like, I've done all this work, and there's all these companies out there making money off it, and I would quite like a little bit of that money, please. And all I did was ask nicely, and now everybody hates me. That's a good question. I know we got a couple of folks in here who are using .NET on projects and things. .NET is open source, right? You can download all of .NET and you can build your own copy of .NET. How many of you have a copy of the .NET source code in case that happens? Of course you don't. That would be crazy. That would be paranoid. Like, of course Microsoft is going to be there in the morning. Of course NuGet is going to be there. Of course GitHub is still going to be there tomorrow. Those things are never going away. It's nice to know that you have the legal right to do all that, but a legal right to do something is not necessarily the same as the material ability to do something. And what is increasingly happening with a lot of companies and a lot of these situations is people are turning around and going, the thing we thought was going to be free forever maybe is not going to be quite as free as we thought forever. Big high-profile one last year was Redis. Redis basically did exactly what Sammy Squirrel did. They turned around and went, Redis is not free anymore. Redis is still open if you're research, education, private, if you're turning over below a certain threshold every year. But if you're a company that sells cloud hosting, you can't use free Redis. You have to give us money for it because you're basically selling our free stuff and you're making loads of money and we'd like some. And the backlash over this was astonishing. It was, so Amazon announced they weren't going to do it. Microsoft said, well, we've already got our own copy of Redis that we wrote while no one was looking. This thing called Valkey, which is a Redis clone, protocol compatible, built in .NET. No, Garnet. Garnet is Microsoft's. Valkey was an open source fork. A bunch of people took the last version of the Redis code base. They went, we've got free Redis over here. Now, this whole thing, it's chaotic. And I don't think what Redis did was unreasonable in this instance. And what's interesting is a year later, Redis turned around and they went almost completely in the other direction because Redis is now published under the Affero GPL. So they went from saying to Amazon, well, if you want to run Redis, you have to give us money, to saying, well, if you want to run Redis for free, you have to publish all your modifications, which, of course, AWS is never going to do because they don't want everyone to know all the metrics and billing and stuff they've added to Redis to turn it into a commercial cloud product. And so they've kind of achieved the same thing, but in a way that the community, I think, is much more excited about. Now, we don't know what's going to happen long term with a lot of these licensing changes on projects like Redis and WordPress is another one that's had a lot of controversy. Automapper, Mediator, Unity, Terraform, that's just the ones I can remember off the top of my head. But the best way to predict the future is to find something where it already happened before and everybody forgot about it, because these things tend to play out in cycles. There used to be, and still is, there's a project called Service Stack. And Service Stack is a set of libraries for building really, really fast message-based APIs on top of .NET. And Service Stack, in 2014, changed from being BSD open license to being a commercial license. And I know this because I was running a team that were using Service Stack at the time, and I got this email about the license change, and it's like, if we're going to upgrade to the next version, it's going to be something like $8,000 per developer per year, or something like that. And I went to my boss, and I was like, can we have money for Service Stack? And the boss said, what's Service Stack? And I said, it's the thing we use to build APIs. My boss said, what are APIs? And that was when I knew I was not going to win that argument. Because we weren't an API company. We used it for internal monitoring and stuff, but we were a company that made a bunch of money. We just didn't make it out of selling APIs. And so we migrated away. We kind of code froze on the last free version and then gradually shifted everything to something else. But I talked to the maintainer, the creator of Service Stack, a couple of times back in the day. And so when I was putting this talk together, I was like, hang on. Service Stack did this in 2014. They've had a decade. What happened? So I emailed him. I emailed Demis, and I was like, hey, what's happened with Service Stack since the whole license changed? I got this lovely email back. I've been able to work full-time on Service Stack ever since leaving Stack Exchange. So he quit a job at Stack Exchange in 2014 to go and do this thing. He's had a decade of development later. It's greatly improved, much more capable than what was possible as a side project. I was willing to take a significant pay cut, so I was pleasantly surprised when it ended up making more money than any job I'd had previously. And then this one, Service Stack has allowed our family to be financially independent, giving me the freedom to work on whichever features I want. Now that to me sounds like who wants to be financially independent and work on whatever features you want? Like, I'll sign up for that. That sounds pretty good. Clearly this is working. Service Stack, despite a lot of angry backlash, has gone from strength to strength. It's on version 8.2. They've just brought out new plugins for doing things with GraphQL and doing things over gRPC. It's fantastic. You know, it's a solid, sustainable project with smart people who are getting paid well to make sure that it stays that way. Now, when Service Stack switched its license, a bunch of people in the community went, no, this won't stand. We're going to take the last version, we're going to fork it. It'll be free forever. It's going to be NService Kit. And NService Kit was interesting for about 18 months. But then what happens is when a project like that switches licensing and people take it and they do a free fork, the users of that system split into two camps. There are the ones who are nice and polite and happy to spend money. And they go with the fork, but with the license change, because they want the continuity. The people who don't want to play nice, don't want to behave, and will not spend any money, they go with the open source one. So what you get is you get the worst half of that user base, the ones with all the unreasonable demands, the ones who are never going to pay for a license, and you don't even have the option of switching your license because they already did that on basically the same product. So this is one of the worst things you can possibly do. If there's a product or a project that your company is using that changes its license, yeah, take a fork internally. That's just yours now. Do not think that you are going to be able to ride to the rescue and valiantly fly the flag of open source, because you're just going to have the same problem they had 2 years ago, only they took all the nice people with them, and so the only ones you've got left are the ones who think they're entitled to all of your free work. And of course, Wilbur wasn't a weasel at all. Wilbur was, we don't know who Wilbur was. Might have been a teenage hacker, might have been a nation-state actor, might have been an organized malware group, might have been, I don't know, Russian, North Korean. We have no idea. This is going on around the world all of the time. It's one of the biggest vulnerabilities in open source, and the most high-profile example of this is a project called the XZ Utils. And XZ is it's part of the authentication system that's used on Linux and some other, not all Unix systems. I made that mistake before and someone pointed out, it's not all Unix systems, these ones are perfectly safe. But it's used on a lot of Unix systems. And it's part of the login authentication mechanism. So basically this is how you get into the servers that your company uses to sell products and take money and send email and DNS and all the other kinds of things. This is the contributor dashboard to XZ Utils. Laju is the project maintainer there. They've been working on this pretty much on their own since 2008. GRT75 is somebody called Jiatan. We don't know who they are. Now, if you look at the timeline on this, Jiatan pops up out of nowhere in about 2024. Just suddenly manifests out, hey, because at this point what's happening is there's a lot of angry people in the GitHub issues. You're not merging pull requests fast enough. You need to fix this. You should have sorted this out by now. Sole project maintainer is getting a little bit stressed about all of this aggro. Somebody pops up and says, hey, let me help you out there. Of course they're going to accept the offer of help. Pretty quickly, this Jiatan person, whoever they are, gets to a point where they have deployment access, they have commit access, they can get stuff merged into production. 2 years later, completely random stroke of luck. There's a guy called Andreas Fraund, he's a security researcher, he's working at Microsoft, he was doing benchmarking on a Friday afternoon, and doing that thing where if you want to benchmark something, you try and switch off everything else your computer is doing, and you're looking at your task manager to see what's using CPU cycles. And he notices that the login process is it's kind of busy. And it shouldn't be kind of busy because he's the only one on the computer. So he goes digging and he looks it up and he discovers that it is doing a whole bunch of stuff that login processes should not be doing. And it turns out that there is a backdoor inside XZ Utils. This person, Jiatan, whoever they were, they had socially engineered to the point where they could get commit access to the repository. Then they had figured out how to do things like deploy a new release. But the code which was going out on package managers like RPM and Aptitude wasn't built from the same source code that was tagged as that release on GitHub. So, incredibly technically sophisticated engineering attack, but they got there by socially engineering open source community and collaboration and goodwill to the point where they were able to deploy that. We came, I don't know, some people say we came within a week of every Linux system on the planet being backdoored by whoever this person was. And we still don't know who they were or what they wanted or what they would have done with it. Or even if they just have left it there quietly and waited and waited and waited until there was an opportunity to do some real damage. Now, Software works better when the people who make it are not worried about paying the bills, because all of us do better work when we are not worried about stuff. And in a perfect world where, we have all the time we need, money is no object, I'm sure everyone in this room would produce amazing code, just beautiful, fast, secure code that covers all of the edge cases, and the Unicode works properly. That's not the world we live in. We live in a world where we have bills to pay, and interest rates are going up, and bosses breathing down your neck, and this needs to be done, and that needs to be done, and what do you mean there's a critical vulnerability? Can we ignore it until tomorrow? Can we ignore it until next week? Can we ignore it till after Christmas? We'll fix it in January, I tell you. Because that's the reality of developing, commercial software when you have clients and deadlines and all that kind of stuff. And increasingly we are finding that people who, when no one's running your code, you have all the time you want. And maybe you're doing all right, you're not worried about money. But then your code gets out there, people start relying on it, they start making money, you turn around and you're like, I'd like a little bit of that back, please. And as we've seen, that is the most difficult about face to do, is to take something that used to be free and be like, actually, about that, because people have a real kind of visceral reaction to that. Now, if there's one thing that you folks remember from this talk, the one thing that I'd like you to remember, take away and repeat it whenever you have the opportunity, is when people publish their code online, what they are saying is, I made this code, it solves a problem, it might help you. That's it. You can take it today. I'm not promising you it'll be here tomorrow. I'm not going to support it. I'm not going to maintain it. It's not going to be free forever. But right here, right now, I am giving you this code, and I am giving you the freedom to run this version of this code. That's amazing. That is a wonderful thing, that we work in this industry where you can solve a problem, and I can give you a perfect facsimile of my solution that you can take away and you can use to solve your own problems. People who share their source code do not owe you anything. I gave you my code. It doesn't mean I want to fix it. It doesn't mean you can email me. It doesn't mean you can WhatsApp me. It doesn't mean you can ask me for help. You can get angry. You can say nasty things about me on Reddit and Hacker News because I didn't fix the bug for your obscure use case. Take the code and run with it and do whatever you need to do. If you want me to help you, let's have a conversation. You can pay me to do that. You can pay someone else to do that. It doesn't have to be me. If support is important to you, pay for support. If continuity is important to you, pay for continuity. Do not be one of those people who thinks that just because you got the code for free, you're going to get everything else for free. That's not how any of this works. And the amazing thing is that there are people who think this is not good enough. And when you compare it to the alternatives, it's Adobe Creative Cloud. Now, I will sing Adobe's praises from the rooftops. They make amazing software. Like the Adobe products that I use, After Effects and Premiere, as a software developer, it blows my mind that they do what they do, because I wouldn't have the thing to say there how to make them do that. It is fantastic, wonderful, professional quality software. Their licensing sucks ass, because you cannot buy any of these things anymore. You can only rent them. And you can only rent them using Adobe Creative Cloud, which if you catch them on the Black Friday sale and you say to that chatbot that you're threatening to leave, you can knock the price down to about £40 a month, which I do every year without fail. And every time I use it, sometimes it works. I have 3 computers. I got a Mac, I got a PC laptop, I got a Windows machine. I only get 2 licenses. So if I log into that one, it says, well, you need to log out of that one to log into this one. About once a week it'll go, oh, we can't verify it's you, we sent you an email, you need to enter the code to get into your software that you're paying us for. Now, if Adobe turn around tomorrow and went, yeah, you know what, we're not giving you the Black Friday discount anymore, now it's 80 quid a month, I'd probably just, pay it. Because I've got a decade's worth of video projects that you can't open in anything else. This isn't like being able to open your Java code in Eclipse and then tomorrow you open it in VS Code because you don't want to use Eclipse anymore. These are proprietary formats. There's a lot of work in there. If they turn around and go, yeah, you know what, £500 a month, I don't know. I'd be like, well, maybe I can pay it for 1 month and I can export as much as I can and then just never touch those projects again. If they go out of business, that's it. No more authentication servers. Doesn't matter how much money I've got. There's nothing I can do to get that software to work again other than find people on the Pirate Bay and ask nicely if they have a working version. This is the alternative. Now, you talk to a certain kind of open source evangelist and they'll, oh, well, you shouldn't be using proprietary software. That's entirely on you. And I've said to people several times, what are the open source free alternatives to Adobe Creative Cloud? And it always comes back with, you should use Blender and the GIMP. Now, Blender and the GIMP is an awesome 70s cop show that never got made. Blender is great at doing 3D graphics. Blender does not do professional video post-production. It's not what it's for. And the GIMP, yeah, the GNU image manipulation, even the name is kind of stupid. I mean, it's a really impressive piece of software, but it's not user-friendly. It's not a replacement for Photoshop. It doesn't scratch the surface in terms of features. If you've got professional work to do in graphics and illustration and video post-production, you're not going to do it with open source because other people are going to eat your lunch. Now, I love the ethos behind the Free Software Foundation. I love the fact that, you know, they've been flying this flag for nearly 5 decades now, and they have accomplished this amazing thing that there is a free open operating system out there, which is very, very good at doing a lot of things. But it does seem to me like the last couple of years we've had a bit of a reckoning. Open source was working great when, you know, interest rates were cheap and companies were hiring engineers. And yeah, of course you can spend Fridays working on your side project. And the world kind of isn't like that anymore, and maybe it won't be like that again. And so we're going to have to do a kind of bit of recalibration as to how we want all this stuff to work. And so I want to wrap up tonight by taking you on a little bit of a thought experiment, if you like. How many of you folks have Spotify accounts? Yeah, lots of us do. Spotify is how people listen to music. I pay, I think, £15 a month or whatever it costs now. You know how much music I own for my 5 years of paying for Spotify? I don't own any music at all. I just have convenience, because if I want to listen to the new Taylor Swift record, click, there it is, and I don't own it, I don't keep it, I can't, if Spotify take it away, I can't listen to it anymore. It is unbelievably convenient though, and that's what the cloud is for corporate IT, it's basically Spotify for servers. It's not Taylor Swift, it's a 64-core PostgreSQL cluster, spin it up, yeah, put your master card in here, there you go, you don't need to wait for anything to get delivered, you can use that for as long as you want. But when you're finished, you don't own anything. They take it away, and that's it. Thank you for playing. Now, some of you folks out there might have tried to get your employers to sponsor open source projects. Because this is something, sometimes people have a little attack of conscience, and they're like, we should give something back. And, you know, I've talked to a lot of people who have tried to do this, and some of them are like, the boss said, yeah, give them 50 quid and put it through on expenses, and then they put the expenses in, and the boss is like, what's this for? And you're like, it's the donation. I said, do you have a tax invoice? And so now you're talking to an overworked maintainer saying, can I have a tax invoice for my £50 donation, please? They have better things to do than give you a tax invoice. Some companies are like, yeah, well, oh no, we can't do that. Actually, we have no accounting process for writing off charitable donations. It is really, really hard to get companies to sponsor open source. But your company probably has a cloud bill with a number at the end of it. And that number might be, you know, $600, it might be 6,000. I've talked to people who have cloud bills that are 6 figures every month. Hundreds of thousands of pounds in hosting. Do you think anyone is going to notice if that number goes up by 10 quid? Or 20, or 50, or 100, or 500? The way to get money out of big companies is not to try and find a new way into their wallet, it's to grab it while their wallet is already open. It's to get another line item onto a bill that they pay every month without even thinking about it. And so what I wanted to do was to crunch the numbers, and let's just imagine we could wire up the pieces so that companies who have Azure, they have Google Cloud, they have AWS, they're using GitHub, you know, those kinds of big companies, we could somehow look at those cloud services getting access to open source software packages and just filter the whole thing backwards and add it to their bill at the end of the month. Now, I used NuGet as an example. I know the .NET ecosystem very well. I've worked in it a long time. Also, they publish pretty good statistics about how busy they are, how many packages, who's downloading what. So I went onto NuGet.org a couple of months ago, and I crunched some numbers. This is the most downloaded packages. The most popular package on there is Newtonsoft JSON, 142 million downloads over the last 6 weeks. Now, when people on Hacker News are like, oh, .NET is dead, I'm like, 142 million downloads every 6 weeks. Let's crunch some numbers. What I did is I basically added up or I integrated the total number of downloads to come up with a reasonable estimate for how busy that actually is. Comes out about this: 53,767,000,000 downloads every 6 weeks. That's roughly 40 billion downloads per month. Now, active users is hard, they don't publish that. What I did is the incredibly scientific thing of I looked at how many times a week I download Newtonsoft JSON, and I assumed that I'm average. It's about 10 times a week. I looked at logs for when I'm doing a lot of that kind of work. Okay, let's assume that's average. That gives us a number of active users based on that. So then, let's set up a business plan here. Half the people who use it, they're free. They're college students, they're startups, they're charities, they're hobbyists, whatever. The basic plan, $15 a month, that's basically anyone who makes a little bit of money out of doing programming. You know, that costs the same as Spotify. The indie plan, yeah, you got a small studio, a couple of engineers, whatever, you're $75 a month. And then enterprise, these are the big players, $500 a month for all of them. Gives us $43 million per month to distribute. Now, if we crunch that against those download numbers, that gives us, you need 1,000 package downloads to earn $1. Now, that is A, insultingly awful. That is worse than Spotify, and everyone hates Spotify because they are so abysmal when it comes to how well they pay their artists. It's also the best open source payment model anyone has ever seen by orders of magnitude, because when you crunch that back into the packages, things like Automapper and Mark, they are making about $13,000 a month. Now, for a project of that size, this is quit my job and do it full-time money. This is, let's hire a couple of engineers. We'll get a console or some contractors in to fix some stuff. We can have full-time support people. We can get someone doing security audits. This is, you know, game-changing. This thing is now a sustainable project with a guaranteed future that doesn't rely on donations. Middle ground, something like 6 Labors Image Sharp. There's a fantastic image processing library for .NET. Now, $3,000 US a month. There are parts of the world where you could live very well on that. There are parts of the world where you can't, but that's like, hey, boss, I'm going to do 4-day weeks till the end of the year, so I can spend Fridays working on this thing. Or, you know, I'm going to take a couple of weeks off, take a sabbatical, do this. Or, you know, there are various ways that this plays into it. The bottom end, so the most obscure library that I ever used for anything real is a library called NAudio, which is an audio processing library. People who do audio don't do it on .NET. That's just, no, that's not how any of this works. I do, because I like .NET. Mark Heath, who runs it, he's making $120 a month. Now that's not quit your job money or take off every Friday money, but you know, that's a new MacBook every 3 years, which is kind of enough to keep working on. This is a relatively small, this is definitely a hobby project. Like no one was ever going to get rich doing audio on .NET. Now, I did this experiment because I wanted to see, are the numbers kind of vaguely adding up? You know, if we could get big companies and say, well, you know, we'll stick $500 a month on your cloud bill, which you probably won't notice, and then percolate that back through. Now, obviously, A, you can't do this with NuGet, because NuGet's free, and if you make it not free, everyone will get very upset. B, you can't solve this in a basement using JavaScript. You've got to have meetings, you've got to have banks, you've got to have taxes, you've got to have paperwork, and all this kind of stuff. But if we want to fix this, we're not going to fix it in a basement using JavaScript. We've got to get out there and talk to the people who actually make this stuff happen. Now, the incentive is minimal. This is capitalism, and in capitalism, if something is free, you take as much of it as you can and don't give anything back, because that is how you win. But maybe, you know, kind of pushing awareness, getting people talking about this kind of thing is a step in the right direction towards a new way of doing what we did in the 90s, which is selling convenience. You know, if you don't want to pay your NuGet fee, well, that's fine. The code is on GitHub. You can download and compile it yourself. Or you can give us a bit of money and we'll do that for you. And maybe we'll audit that that binary did actually come from that code, and we'll give you MD5 checksums and all of this kind of stuff. And like I said, you know, this is what Slackware and Red Hat were doing back in the 90s. They're taking free software and they are making it convenient, they're packaging it, and they are getting money in exchange for the packaging and the convenience. We can't do the about face. If we do this on NuGet, Maven, NPM, RubyGems, any of those, everyone will get very upset. Those things used to be free. But those things are not going to be the last package managers that we see in the world of software development, because the WebAssembly system interface is coming. I was chatting to a couple of folks earlier about Blazor, and we'll continue that conversation over drinks in a minute. I'm not that interested in Blazor. What I am interested in is WebAssembly, because WebAssembly is a new instruction set that runs on browsers. It's basically we've invented a new computer that doesn't exist, and we've put our new computer into all of your computers without you realizing. So now people like Adobe again, they want to be able to run Photoshop in a browser, and they don't want to build it in JavaScript in order to do that. So if they can write Photoshop, compile it to assembly, and run it in a virtual machine inside of, yeah, great success for them. And the WebAssembly system interface is an astonishing proposal that is, it's kind of working. It's at the viability stage. I could build a video encoding thing in Haskell, and I could compile it to WebAssembly using systems interface, and I could give you that binary. And you could then write an interface to that in C#, and it would talk to my Haskell code, because they're both WebAssembly. talking to each other at a binary level. And then we could give all that to somebody else who writes something in C++. And we could give that to you, and you could write something in Python's probably never going to work because it's too dynamically typed. But all of these languages, Go, Rust, all of these compile down to WebAssembly, which means at the moment, if you want to do JPEG image compression in Ruby, you have to find a Ruby library to do it. If you want to do JPEGs in Python, you have to find a Python library to do it. If you want to do it in C#, you've got to find a C# library to do it. With WebAssembly, you don't care what the library was written in. You're just like, I need the WebAssembly that does JPEGs. And you're like, here it is. And there is going to be a library, a repository of these packages because people are going to get in there and be like, this one does video streaming. This one does real-time chat. This one does encryption. This one does Bitcoin. This one does this. All these kinds of things. And so we're going to end up with a massive repository. And of course, you know, the temptation will be, let's rush in, let's make it free, let's get it out there, and let's worry afterwards about, oh, maybe we shouldn't have made the whole thing free. So maybe let's not do that. Maybe let's think up front and be like, look, there is value here that companies are going to make a lot of money out of. Maybe we should approach it differently this time around. Open source is 25 years old. We have seen free as in beer, and it's awesome. You know, there are people all over the world using software that they didn't have to pay money for to host websites and make music and make videos and write essays and blog posts and all this kind of stuff. And that is fantastic, but there are also a whole lot of Sammy squirrels out there going, I did all this work and now everyone else is rich except me, and maybe that's not entirely fair. We've done free as in speech, and free as in speech is fantastic, and there is this free open operating system that no one can take away, that everyone can use forever, but we've seen the pressure that is put on people for giving their code away. We've seen the vulnerability, we've seen the social engineering attacks, we've seen all this kind of stuff. I want to think about a third kind of freedom, because there's a whole bunch of different things in the English language that can be free. We can have free beer, we can have free speech, we can have a free weekend. You can have a weekend where you wake up on Saturday and you're like, I'm not going to worry about anything. I'm not worried about paying my bills, and I'm not worried about social engineering attacks, and I'm not worried about security vulnerabilities, and I'm going to enjoy my life for a couple of days. And on Monday, I'm going to go back to work, and I'm going to do all the good stuff. But right now, I'm going to take the bikes, and I'm going to put them on the back of the van, and I'm going to go to the beach. Because that's the kind of free I want us to think about. We've had free as in speech, we've had free as in beer. Let's try free as in weekend. Thank you. Before we break, I just want to plug something, because I'm doing some stuff on Zoom later this month. I've got 2 days of basically training about how I write these kinds of talks, and how I pull the ideas together, and how to do rehearsal, how to choose a topic. If you want to talk at conferences and those kinds of things, how do you get through the call for papers process? What makes a good talk? What can you talk about? How do you make good slides? All these kinds of things. I realized doing this immediately after a talk, kind of, if any of you out there thinking that talk wasn't very good, this is the worst timed sales pitch in the world. But if you're watching that and you're like, how does all this stuff actually happen? Yeah, I'm doing 2 days of it. It's on Zoom. Early bird tickets are It's all on, like I said, Zoom, 2 afternoons, 2 till 6 p.m., 29th and 30th of July. So you get to sit at home with your computer and a cup of coffee and hang out with me on Zoom for an afternoon and, yeah, learn how I do all the kind of stuff I do. And if any of you want to know more about that or any of the stuff I do, come and say hello. Otherwise, it's probably time to go to the bar, right?
Keep that up for a second, because I've only just managed to get your face out of the URL. Brilliant. Any questions? Any comments?
The silence of enlightenment. I love it. It's like, oh, yeah.
I'm assuming that last URL was a real URL.
It's a real URL. So the talk is up there. All of the people are like, can we have your slides? And I'm like, the good stuff isn't really in the slides. The good stuff is in the words. So if you go to the URL, then it's got a transcript of a version of the talk. It's got all of the kind of the working behind the calculations. It's got the code I use to scrape NuGet's package repository to get those statistics and all that kind of stuff out there. So yeah, if you want to know more about where the numbers came from, all of that is up on freeasinweekend.org. And yeah, if anyone actually is like thinking, yeah, we should totally build a paid package management repository, give me a shout, because that sounds like something that would be fun to work on. But we're not giving it away for free. All right.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, question.
Thank you. But the ZX analogy is really good.
Yeah.
I saw a picture of a table, and there was a it, and that's ZX, and the whole of our infrastructure is balancing precariously on top of
I know exactly the thing you mean.
Project.
I think, except I'm not on Wi-Fi. It was an XKCD. There's like this big, you've seen that, like architecture map of internet infrastructure, and then it's this little thing. And then the alt text on it is, if the guy maintaining ImageMagick decides to quit, we're all screwed. And ImageMagick is fun. I have, ImageMagick is, you folks know ImageMagick? Like image processing, convert images to different formats and do all kinds of stuff with it. I have the most insignificant contribution possible because I have literally 1 bit of code in ImageMagick. Because when I was at university, so in 1999, so 26 years ago, I was one of the first people to get ImageMagick working inside a Perl host on Microsoft Windows to do dynamic image reciting. And Windows needed a single Boolean flag passed to one of the methods to tell it to stream results in binary instead of text mode. And so my contribution to ImageMagick was a patch consisting of literally the digit 1. And they merged it, and it's still in there. And so I contributed literally, it was a comma and then a 1. So that's it, and it's in ImageMagick, and that's my code, and I gave that away to the world for free. So, all right, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Hey, you're very welcome.
I'm also saying you are passionate about what you do.
Hey, anytime someone's like, come drink beer and talk about software.
Good. My question is, I know you mentioned AI systems and things like that. In the next 10 years, 15 years, where do you see the place of renewables?
Sorry, there's some traffic. Just repeat the question. In the next 10 years, where do you see it?
Businesses cutting costs and leveraging AI. Where do you see the future of AI systems and integrating features that AI systems develop into main code?
Yeah. I mean, it's so one, we're at a point where I don't think it's possible to give a presentation about any subject right now without someone afterwards going, well, what about AI? Because everything is like, what about AI? I think that, so broadly address the impact I think AI is going to have. I think right now we are at the hype cycle. We're kind of just coming over the top of the point where everyone has gone like, oh, holy crap, this is amazing. Look at all the things it can do. And the 2 things which are going to happen, there is a historical cycle about artificial intelligence, which is about every 10 years we get really excited about it, and then all the bits that work, we keep those and we call them something else, and we stop talking about AI for another decade. And in the 1960s, everyone got really excited about AI, and then they decided the bits that worked are called functional programming and symbolic expressions, S expressions, and that was Lisp. And the bits that don't work, don't talk about those because our investors lost a lot of money. And then in the 1970s, they started talking about natural language processing, and that came up with the precursor to things like expert systems, like the install shield wizard. You know, this idea of a computer that asks you questions and you answer them one by one and that gets you to where you want, that was AI in the late 1970s. And then they went, actually, no, that's just an expert system, and now we just call it a wizard, and everything else, don't talk about that anymore. Then in the 90s, they're like, AI is going to be amazing. And then we're like, well, yeah, QuakeBot's got pretty good, and it's quite good at chess and Go, but actually those are neural networks. Stop talking about AI. And then the web comes along, and suddenly there is this connected corpus of material that we can train language models on, and so we get another spike about probably 20 years ago now. And none of these have made kind of mainstream headlines the way things like ChatGPT have, just because they haven't been as accessible. But the kind of the scale of the technical accomplishment, if all you do is read, mainstream media, it's like we went from nothing to super intelligent commander data machines in the last 2 years. But actually, it's been this kind of very, very incremental process. And yeah, the latest round, neural networks. Yeah, we kept those, but those aren't artificial intelligence. Those are neural networks. And those get used for all kinds of things. They're used in games, they're used in diagnostic imaging and medicine. Right now, what I think we're going to see in maybe 5 years is language models are going to be a very well-established tool that we know is good at solving certain kinds of problems. And we're not going to talk about AI anymore because all the investors will have lost all their money. There'll be a reckoning. At the moment, they're burning literally billions of dollars giving this stuff away for free. I think what we're going to see is the cost of providing it will come down and the cost of consuming it will go up. Is it Claude just announced that they're all singing, all dancing packages, $200 per developer per month, which is a lot of people going, what, you said this would be free, and then we never said it would be free. Your first taste was free. You want another one? And I think we're going to see, Microsoft is putting Copilot into absolutely everything, and I don't know whether they're just going to keep footing the bill on that, but if Microsoft turned around and when you have to pay an extra $100 a month for Copilot, I think Office users would be like, well, we don't want Copilot because we're not going to spend that, and that would be a real kind of moment of reckoning. So yeah, I think that it is good at certain kinds of things. The existential crisis I see facing software is that if companies start using AI in the place of junior developers, then we're not going to get the next generation of senior developers, and you can't use AI well unless you know how to read what it gave you to see if it's any good. And less experienced developers don't have the experience to be able to look at what ChatGPT just spat out and see that line's not going to work, that's a security vulnerability, and that should be the other way around, this kind of thing. Vibe coding, yeah, well, it's... it consistently, it surprises me. It's one of those things I don't enjoy using AI. To me, the best description, my friend Martin said, working with AI is like somebody helping you build a Lego set, only they're doing all the building and your job is to step in when they get it wrong. So it's like you're working with someone who's too dumb to build Lego and they're having all the fun, which often feels like that. And it's just, it's got a little weird, you go onto ChatGPT, try this later when you get home, ask it to write you a PowerShell script to do something. And then without anything, just say, that doesn't work. And what it'll do is it'll apologize and it'll change something. Every time. Absolute, guaranteed. And most of the time, the thing that didn't work, it will actually be something that doesn't work. And I'm like, well, why couldn't you, just, and it's a very, very kind of certain thing in terms of, definitely it can do some things which were unprecedented a couple of years ago. Definitely a lot of companies are using AI as a smokescreen to fire a lot of developers because it's good for their share prices. Definitely the model at the moment is not sustainable because companies like OpenAI are burning billions of dollars in investment and they're not making any of that back by actually selling what they do. And I think the commercially viable applications are going to be far more niche and specialist than the whole, here's a website where if you ask it for a picture of a squid playing a banjo in an ambulance, it'll do that for free. And I'm like, what problem does that solve for anybody on this planet? You'll know that it's intelligent when you say, hey, make a picture of a squid playing a banjo in an ambulance, and it says, why? Go outside, touch grass, talk to a friend, have a cup of coffee, do something with your life. To go back to your specific question about, open source licensing and sustainability, there is an outcome here where we don't need human developers anymore because AI tools just generate all the code that the business people need and they do it all for free. I don't know what I'd do in that situation. I'm not much good at gardening and I don't play golf, but I don't think that is terribly likely. What I think is going to happen is we're going to be in for a couple of years of, we'll use the phrase vibe coding as a shorthand. Companies are going to vibe code a lot of crap. They're going to ship it. And then we are going to get called in to fix the mess. And at that point, I think there is going to be a resurgence in people going, well, I'm going to create a set of tools that will help us solve these sort of problems, but I am not going to give them away for free to the companies who vibe-coded developers into a corner. And I think that there will be at the moment it feels like there's a sort of shift in the balance of power. Because developers for a long time have been in the incredibly privileged position of being able to command enormous salaries, comfy chairs, good coffee. Yeah, we want a foosball table, otherwise we'll go and work for somebody else. And the last couple of years, employers are like, okay, fine, go and work for somebody else. They don't have a foosball table either. Which, is maybe a sort of overdue correction in the balance of the economy. But I think it's going to go too far that way, and then it's going to swing back a little bit towards the middle. In terms of what happens for sustainable open source, like I said, I think if your company or one of your projects depends on something which is changing its licensing, then yeah, the responsible thing to do is either pay for it, and if that's not feasible, you need to take a copy of the code that your company needs to do its job, and you need to accept that that's your code now. and nobody else is going to come along and magically fix it for you. And keep an eye on how much that costs, because at some point you probably want to be able to go to your boss or your CFO and say, we're spending 5 days a week maintaining this thing that we could have just licensed for $5,000 a year and be done with it. But yeah, there you go. Nice, short, quick answer. Right.